Hey, good morning. I have a special guest with me here today. This is Dr. Regina Parnell. She is um, on the other side of the state of Missouri, over there on the east side in St. Louis. And I'm going to let her introduce herself to you and kind of what she's doing right now as a social service agent, change agent, social worker. And tell us a little bit about Dr. Regina. What makes you tick?
Oh my God. Social work. I'm a social worker 24/7. I love the work. I've been a social worker for 27 years. Currently, I am supervisor over a wraparound wellness center for a school district that's in the community. And what we do there, we're social workers on the scene. So when the police is called out for a traumatic event, we're alerted at the same time. So if there's a death on the scene or domestic violence or tragic car accident, we're there with the police officers, providing the support to the families and mediating between the crowds and the police. We're a pilot program. So with that, that's a lot of pressure because it's a new program that the state has given us funding for. I also a consultant for a reentry program, and I help them develop programming for 18 to 24-year-old males that have been incarcerated and returning home. And I'm also teaching at Virginia Commonwealth University, Master's in Social Work program, Social Justice and Advocacy.
All right. You sound like me. You're type A and always busy, which is probably why you and I are kindred spirits.
Right, right, right. I agree.
So I reached out to Dr. Regina because of her passion about um, uh, uh, specifically young Black males and how the school district was failing them, setting them up to fail. And and thinking about this topic of developmental awareness when you are trying to be trauma informed, an example that I like to give to help people sort of put it in perspective is, you have a 14-year-old in front of you who maybe has an ACEs score of an 8 or 9. I mean, a lot of trauma, domestic violence, sexual abuse, separation from parents, just a lot. He's 14 chronologically, but emotionally, he might be 8 or 9. And when you expect him to be 14 all the time, you are, in essence, setting him up to fail, as an example. And sometimes I don't think people think that. They see a 14-year-old, they expect 14-year-old thinking, 14-year-old processing, 14-year-old behaviors, when in fact, if you've suffered that much trauma, you're setting them up to fail. So, what are your thoughts to that? And um, I think it'll be really important for my audience to hear.
Yeah. So I would think first, I think they would need to look at this little short video that I always like to start out when I'm training individuals on just that perception of who individuals are, just as a whole, just who a person is. And that video is called um, Almost Not a Bear. And so, with that, it's about changing your perception. This bear wakes up one morning and everything that he knows is not about him anymore. It's a foreign world. And so, he's trying to prove that even though I'm in a different environment, I'm still a bear.
Still a
And
bear.
he goes through all these change of commands, and everybody is trying to force him to change who he is. And toward the middle of the video, he starts to conform to what they want him to be, but inside he's not. So as we look at individuals, we have to take away our perceptions of who we think they are and understand them as a person. Get to know their story. Because you can't have a 14-year-old that appears to be 14, that intellectually is 14, but has had trauma that has impacted him. So we have, as social workers, as service providers, we have to think about that child development. We have to look at, do they trust and mistrust? Are they accepting, or have they been shot to the side? So we have to think about, we have to process our own values and core policies before we even work with the individual to gain that understanding of them.
There's a part about 3/4 of the way into the bear video, which is really profound. The higher ups, the chain of command, who says you're not a bear, they
Right,
take him to a zoo to see some bears,
right,
and he says, "Hey, I'm a bear like you all," and they say, "You're not a bear." So he's even with people who he is, and they say, "You're not a bear, because if you were a bear, you'd be in here with us. You wouldn't be out there. So you are clearly
not
um, clearly not a bear."
right,
So
right,
you're
right,
turned away by like-minded or the same people.
right. And as you think about, and like you said, Greg, I was my focus is African American males in the schools. So if you think about how some African American males are pushed aside, the ones that are labeled, the ones that teachers make known that you're a bad student, you're going to sit here. Sometimes other African American males detach themselves from them too. You're not like me. We're different, and that even gives them a sense of insecurity, because who am I? If I'm not like my peers that look like me, that sound like me, that live in my same neighborhood, then who am I? And so, as service providers, we have to learn to include and not exclude.
Yeah, when we're excluding it, what pops into my mind is one time Sister Teresa was asked, "What's the greatest human tragedy?" And she very quickly said, "Feeling unwanted, unloved, and unconnected." So when
Right,
we are not considering, developmental awareness when we're working with clients, whether it be 38-year-old women or 14-year-old boys,
right,
and we create that level of disconnection, we are in essence making them be unwanted, unloved, unconnected, which is,
right.
now they're going to just behave with their trauma language.
Right, right. And like you said, regardless of what age or what population we're focusing on. I'm a social worker, and although I pinpoint focus on African American males, I work with the general population, especially when I'm doing trauma or reentry. I'm working with the reentry program. I'm working with their families, not just the boys. And when I'm on trauma scene, I'm working with a variety of individuals, providing that support. So we have to learn to, as service providers, when we're walking into a situation, we have to learn to drop our values. We have to be equal with the individual that we're working with. And when I say equal, I mean we have to learn to hone in on them. We can't go in with, I'm a middle class woman and I know social work and this is best practice. We have to go in and decide what is best for this individual that I'm working with now. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I went on a scene where a 24-year-old young man was killed instantly because he was driving too fast and he hit a utility pole. And so he had siblings. He had 9 other siblings, and they all were there on the scene. Police, we were alerted when the police. So you had he had some siblings that were intoxicated at 12 o'clock in the day. So one of the officers asked me to work with him. So I'm working with his brother. He's weeping of alcohol. One of my colleagues was like, he's too drunk to be dealt with. No, he still has emotions. He still can grieve. And so, he was cussing, he was screaming. And I told him, I was like, scream. I was like, let's get out of the crowd. I want you to scream. I want you to grieve. I want you to let the world know that that's your brother in that car and that you miss him. So we can't, prejudge him because he was going through grief. Although he was intoxicated at midday, he still had the right to grieve. He still had the right to mourn his brother, even though he was intoxicated.
When I hear you say that, I'm thinking about the values, and it isn't just social work values, it's also counselor values, marriage and family therapist values, and that is meet the client at their level of functioning.
Right.
And then
Right.
respect their self-determination. It's it may not be the way I live to be intoxicated at noon, but it's not about judging him. It's about meeting him at that level. And if we do that, then we truly are being developmentally aware as we're applying, trauma-informed practices at that point.
Right. 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 Because he could have, leaving him in the midst of the crowd and with his grief and his anger could have led him to being arrested. But he had the right. And that's why I removed him from the crowd to allow him to scream, yell, cuss, and cry. And at the end, he kind of melted down in my shoulders. And even though it's not best practice, I gave him a prayer. I was whispering a prayer in his ear, giving him that strength, giving him that encouragement. And when I stopped talking, he looked at me. He was like, "Amen. Are you a preacher?" And I kind of laughed. I was like, "No, I'm just here to help you." And so we stood there for a while because the scene was, they had to call the jaws of life and move the utility pole and take. So it was a while before all of it ended. But we were able to stand there and, he would laugh, he would cry. He had all these range emotions. And as a social worker, I know that's grief. I know he's going through the channels of grief, but I never included him back into the crowd. We stayed on the side so he could deal with what he wanted to and how he wanted to.
And it's not that you were this most amazing therapist, you were present, you were creating connection, right?
Right.
And at that point being very very developmentally aware. This is where he's at,
Right.
this is how he's presenting, so I'm going to meet him at that level.
Right.
Because I will go out on the code of ethics for a moment. Yes, the code of ethics says we don't treat when they're intoxicated, but you weren't treating him, you were being present with him and accepting him for where he was and for who he is. And that's the essence of being developmentally aware.
Right. 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 Being present.
Being present, creating connection.
Right. And not excluding. Not excluding. I could have easily, he had nine, like I said, it was 9 siblings. I could have easily went to one that was sober mind and was just crying. But he meant something to me too.
So let's go a little side route. So you had a colleague that said, let's not deal with him.
Mm-hmm.
Intoxicated.
Mm-hmm.
Any follow-up with that colleague afterwards, just out of curiosity? Because that is a colleague, unfortunately, that acting out was not acting out, but is displaying some bias, right? Some inherent, maybe unconscious bias. They didn't realize they were doing it. Let's do a little side route and talk about that for a moment.
So yeah, it was definitely because, like I said, I am the supervisor of the team. So it was definitely, we debrief after each situation. So when we leave a scene, we go back to our center and we debrief. We talk about what went right, what went wrong. So that situation was dealt with. If you're uncomfortable, so my statement to my entire staff was, if you're uncomfortable with dealing with the situation, seek supervision. Don't exclude. If you see a situation boiling over, especially with the interaction with the police, seek supervision immediately. Get my attention or get the directors sometimes on the scene, depending on what type of scene it is. Get our attention quickly and have us to come over, because our goal is not to have anyone excluded or arrested when we're on the scene with the police. We want to be that mediator to help the families grieve through their situations without impacting them any further. So without providing any more trauma to them.
Right. And, doing trauma-informed work, whether you're stepping into a crisis or you're debriefing or you're just sitting down with a client, I do like to share this. You've got to start with your own self-awareness.
Yeah.
there's no shame in saying, I can't deal with this client right now. And instead of writing them off and saying, oh, we're not going to deal with him, you tag out and you go get somebody to tag in, and then have, be very aware of your self-awareness. Because I can't be the end all be all to all clients, all situations. And that's okay. That's human.
Right.
Self-awareness, how critical is that?
Yeah, yeah. And then you said a good point right there, Greg, that tag in, tag out. We can't be everything to everyone. We have to have our own self-care. But being aware that we have a bias is important. You are the professional. You have to be able to tap into yourself to know, okay, I can't deal with someone that's intoxicated because maybe I have a parent that was intoxicated, or spouse, or a relative that I just couldn't deal with when they were intoxicated. So this brings up issues within me. I need to tag out. Knowing yourself, self-awareness is key when we're talking about trauma informed. You have to be, you have to be informed. It's like riding an airplane, and when you get in, they say, secure your mask first before you help someone else.
Oh, yeah.
We have to work ourselves before we can help someone else. So knowing your own triggers, knowing your own strengths and weaknesses before you try to help someone else is very important.
That was such excellent advice. Thank you so much. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Just the simplicity of getting on an airplane. You gotta be aware of yourself before you can help someone else.
Right, right.
Hey, thank you so much for your time here this morning, Dr. Regina. I am so grateful for your time and for our friendship,
Yes.
and your words of wisdom. And I'm going to share the bear video with
Please.
future students and certainly the staff here at the domestic violence shelter. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video, but hold on for a moment.
All right. Thank you, Greg.